And we are live. So, hey, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you for joining. For those of you who are new here, I'm Jen Benford. I write the Divergent Talent Alchemist. And this is only my second live. I'm excited to be joined by Allan White. He writes the Dyspraxic Lens. He has become a friend to me since my time joining Substack back in January, February. And he is going to share today a lot of his lived experience around dyspraxia, as well as a little bit about what it is for informational purposes. So, nothing that we share is going to be medical advice or anything, but this is for information and awareness because one of my goals in writing the Diversion Talent Alchemist is to spread around awareness around topics that are not discussed as often. So dyspraxia really falls into that category. And Allan, he is a writer, he is an author of 2 books, and he's an educator. So if you are joining, welcome. Feel free to use the chat. We will try to answer questions as best as possible throughout the session, but it's really meant to be a conversation and informal. So, with that, I will kick it over to Allan to introduce himself.
Sure. So, yeah, I'm still kind of experimenting with the angle of my camera and everything, make sure everything's good.
No
Um,
worries. It looks
yeah,
good.
yeah. Um, so, okay. So, yeah, my name is Allan White, and I write on Substack as the Dyspraxic Lens. That's the name of my newsletter. And I also have recently self-published a book called Disruptive Pathways, Dyspraxic Odyssey. And it is a memoir about basically it primarily recounts, my early adulthood, sort of coming of age, with undiagnosed and then, later misdiagnosed dyspraxia. And I write it in a way that hopefully, will kind of also kind of shine a spotlight on, how certain societal factors, impact, the lived experience of different neurodivergent people. But so as far as like the first question I would like to address, first of all, what exactly is dyspraxia and how does it show up in daily life? Dyspraxia, that's the term most oftentimes used in the United Kingdom. Most people within the British neurodivergent community are a little bit more familiar with that term, but it's also known as the dyspraxia is also known as developmental coordination disorder, which is on the DSM. It's also on the ICD series as well. And the term, as I'll get to later, is a little bit misleading, developmental coordination disorder, in the sense that it's a bit more than just coordination. Um, it One of its characteristic features, of course, is motor impairment. For example, there's difficulty with gross motor skills, fine motor skills, equilibrium functioning, so your sense of balance, basically proprioceptive capacities, the sense of your body's position in space and time, basically. Um, and by motor skills, most of us probably have some idea as to what that entails, basically just the physical execution and action of bodily movement, basically. So, essentially, with dyspraxia or DCD, as it's often called, there's going to be, impairments of coordination. These people might be sometimes referred to as just basically clumsy or physically awkward or whatever. One of the first things that might be noticed, in a child with dyspraxia are things like there's going to be delays in reaching key developmental milestones like walking. Speech may be affected, so there may be delays in speech.
Yeah.
Also things like tying shoelaces, learning to ride a bicycle, those things, there might be delays in that as well.
Right.
Um, And so those are some of the key things that are oftentimes, noticed developmentally, in children, with dyspraxia. And of course, it doesn't just, it's not exclusive to children, it persists throughout the lifespan. And, and so, and, um, what else was I going to say? So, and
So
there
you're
can,
bumping into stuff, right, Alan? You're bumping into stuff. It impacts your driving abilities, right,
yeah,
in
yeah,
later stages of life.
yeah. In many cases, yes. I have known of cases of people with dyspraxia who basically they bump into physical objects, within the environment. And I'm not quite that bad. Um, I don't have, those types of problems. But in my case, I've never been able to say, to learn how to drive a car. And I've made two unsuccessful attempts early in adulthood, and I knew there were always, no matter how much practice I got at it, there were always like irreconcilable difficulties that I experienced, with like the timing of key actions, like applying the brakes in time in relation to things like lights, traffic
Yeah.
signs, merging in a timely manner. Um, and so I just decided that it would be best that I simply not drive at all. And so I get around largely by mostly physical powered modes of transportation, walking, cycling, etc. I use what's known as a recumbent bicycle, which is, they're basically designed in a way to where you're sort of leaning back as a back support. The pedals are out in front of the rider, and it's much lower to the ground, so the center of gravity going to be a lot lower, and I find it a lot easier to balance myself on a recumbent bicycle or a recumbent tricycle versus a typical upright bicycle. So that's
Yeah.
just one adaptation I've had to make, because I don't drive, and I've never been able to learn how to drive.
Yeah. I've seen Alan's recumbent bike.
Oh yeah,
We'll share in the article a photo of it
oh
if
yeah,
that's cool with you.
oh definitely, definitely, yeah, yeah. And that's one major way that it shows up, at least in my case. So, some dyspraxics do manage to learn how to drive, and a key thing to bear in mind about dyspraxia, like many of these neurodivergences, is that it can show up very differently from person to person. Um, and I would suspect that, that a dyspraxic individual, who is less impaired in terms of cognitive processing speed and maybe, was primarily fine motor impacted versus gross motor impacted, might have a little less difficulty learning how to drive, but that's just my speculation, as far as I know, no actual studies have been done on it and what have you, but and of course, like I said, there's some dyspraxic adults like myself, who never learned to drive. And another way that it shows up for me is that with stairs, despite the fact that I can walk quite adeptly and swiftly over level ground or natural slopes and whatnot without any difficulty. In fact, if I'm walking down the street and there's someone in front of me, there's a good chance I'm going to overtake them. I'm going to, you know, I'm going to pass them up, because, I've developed a pretty fast walking gait, as a result of just, having to always get around, with human powered modes of transportation, but walking over most natural terrains, or paved sorts of environments, is a very different involves very different physical capacities than walking up and down a flight of stairs. I mean, sure, in both cases, strength and stamina, a lot of strength, muscular strength and endurance and cardiovascular fitness, are involved, but with stairs, there's the additional element of equilibrium, the additional element of like the fine motor timing of, specific muscular actions, particularly those involved in the finer motor sort of, finer joint coordination, like with the foot and ankle joint. And in my
Yeah.
case, I'm primarily fine motor impaired. especially if I walk down a flight of stairs, I mean, I'm likely to miss a step all over. Um,
Yeah.
and so, because of my impairment that I have in equilibrium, that comes with the dyspraxia.
Yeah.
And,
Go ahead.
um,
Go ahead. No,
yeah.
this is great.
And, just to be clear, my actual official diagnosis is developmental coordination disorder, along with something known as slow cognitive processing speed, which falls under the category, using the DSM criteria, falls under the category of a sort of a non-specifiable specific learning difficulty. It usually gets the designation of NOS, otherwise, meaning not otherwise specified. And that's essentially when UK clinicians refer to dyspraxia, that's essentially what they're referring to is that combination of DCD along with some specific cognitive impairments that don't quite fit within the category of like any of the other sort of more widely recognized neurodivergences like ADHD or autism or
Yeah.
whatever.
Or even
And
dyslexia.
exactly. And so dyspraxia is not really an officially recognized term. And it's more of, like I said, kind of a colloquialism, I mean, that was kind of coined by a lot of clinicians, within the UK to describe, DCD, especially if, like I said, there's that combination of, um, certain cognitive impairments, that aren't readily categorizable.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
That's great information, Alan. You were saying something earlier that I wanted to touch on around, the stairs and difficulty with that sort of thing. If you could redesign schools or workplaces with dyspraxia in mind, what is the very first change that you would make so that it's a more inclusive environment for you?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of us are going to be using, many of the same kinds of building accessibility features, that are kind of applicable to other sort of physical handicaps, I mean, like elevators, ramps,
Mhm.
things like that. Because some dyspraxic people do have to use ambulatory aids, if they're traversing over any significant distance, I mean, I've known of cases where they have to use walkers, because they don't have quite the strength and stamina, I mean, over long distances.
Yeah.
So, and in my case, I mean, like with stairs, I mean, I use an elevator if one is available. Escalators are completely out of the question. If I have to go down, like, say, some steps leading to and from a building, I'm oftentimes just going to walk down the wheelchair ramp, to
Yeah.
minimize my risk of, like, say, missing a step and falling. So a lot of those kinds of features are very applicable with dyspraxia too. I've got some notes, and one of the things that some other things, that, like, say, particularly within office environments, professional environments, I mean, in terms of, making a workplace a bit more accessible with dyspraxia are things like a lot of times I've heard of instances, I mean, where sort of color coded navigation aids being used to direct, like, we see what do they, I mean, you're being used to direct, I mean, like what direction you go to get to what part of the building, things like that, because some dyspraxic peoples, will have problems with spatial awareness in those contexts and, and those types of accommodations have proven helpful.
Yeah.
Um, and in terms of so just in terms of just general accessibility within buildings, those types of things help. Um, and and that's those are kind of some main things. In terms of work environments now, in terms of like professionally,
Mhm.
uh, some of the things that I've known of where that some of the accommodations that I've known of, that again, I mean, have proven to be successful with dyspraxia is Like for example, just like allowing processing time. A lot of us are going to have difficulty with, processing speed. And so give employees time to process information before expecting a response, especially in meetings,
Yeah.
receiving complex instructions. Um, Also breaking down complex tasks, breaking them down into smaller, more manageable steps. Um, Flexible communication, allowing for different communication styles such as written, verbal, visual, um, providing tests in clear, concise formats with bullet points. If does all that seem to make sense?
It does. No, it makes I am resonating with everything you're saying, even not just for people who are dyspraxic, but also the entire neurodivergent community. Like a lot of us communicate differently. Some of us prefer instant message, some of us prefer email, some of us do better on a face-to-face call. So it's finding what works well for
Mm.
the person who you're working with, who's reporting to you, who's on your team. The processing speed is also something that I resonate with because I need time to process. Like a lot of times somebody will say something to me and I am not diagnosed dyspraxic, by the way. I should say that. I am diagnosed ADHD and a couple other things. My processing speed though is very slow. So somebody could say something to me in the moment and it might take me a day or two to really comprehend, okay, what did they say to me and how does that impact the rest of my week? So, for example, if someone's assigning me a new task at work, I may just agree to that and say, yes,
Yep.
give me more. I'm a go getter. And then that impacts five other projects that I have um, because I felt pressure to respond in that moment. So I think that processing time is really something that's important and it ties directly to communication in general. So those are all great points.
Oh yeah, 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 and so those are some of the main accommodations, that I've known of, being used for dyspraxia, professional environment.
Yeah.
Um, since I've been self-employed for so long, it's just that I pretty much set things up as I feel appropriate. I have to,
Seems
yeah, yeah, I am a bit out of touch as to, what's kind of going on in the real world in terms of accommodations, for different neurodivergences. But it is something that I do kind of, keep up on and whatnot,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
but you mentioning, how, so much of it, is very much, can resonate with other neurodivergences as well, and that's kind of the lens that I try to write with is, what I sometimes refer to as sort of a pan neurodivergent lens, because, regardless of what particular neurotype we're talking about, a lot of us are going to have a lot of similarity and commonality in terms of, how best to accommodate us in different contexts and different environments and whatnot.
yeah, absolutely. I'm accommodating myself right now. As you're talking and you hit on the points, I'm saying, okay, processing speed, communication, so that I don't forget and move on to the next thing, right? So it's finding ways that finding things that work for you and also advocating for yourself in these professional spaces because nobody's probably going to do it for you.
No.
Um, and I love what you said too about working for yourself. I'm also an entrepreneur now, as you know, and it's different and also so freeing. And I don't know if you'd found the same thing, Alan, but I have met so many people, particularly on Substack, who are also neurodivergent
Oh yeah,
entrepreneurs.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
We have that control of our schedule and our day and the things around us, and it's really nice to be able to work for yourself. Can you share a personal story of a space or system that either made life much harder for you, or one that really worked well for you? Does anything come to mind?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. In terms of one that worked well, uh, when I was getting my undergraduate degree at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, um, see, the Evergreen State College, and anyone who's kind of familiar with it, knows that it's always been a very sort of alternative kind of liberal arts institution. And I pursued my degree largely through self-directed study there. And I basically did, my background is actually, my formal academic background is actually in anthropology and archaeology. And at the Evergreen State College, I did a lot of my own self-directed studies, involving what's known as experimental archaeology projects, basically where, and when I say experimental archaeology, what I'm referring to is sort of a research method in archaeology where that involves essentially using actualistic one-to-one experimentation, with tools and technologies from different eras of the past, sort of replicating those tools and technologies and conducting experiments with them to answer various questions about, how people lived, at different time periods in the past. So when I was at Evergreen, I did a lot of experiments, using uh, like the manufacturing of specific stone artifacts, that are from the archaeological record, because I'm a flint knapper, I know how to make and use stone tools and what have you. And um, the way the program structure was set up that enabled me to do that is that I found a professor who is willing to sponsor my contract, my independent study contract. And this professor also was an archaeologist, and I would basically develop, like a question or a hypothesis to test, and and develop an experimental design, to test that hypothesis, and and then we would, myself and the professor would go over my entire design and everything, and and I would follow it and report once a week, in terms of, how my project was going and everything. And and overall, the workload in terms of like how much written work I had to turn in during a quarter was a lot more manageable.
Yeah.
And 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 I felt like I learned quite a bit more than if I were just studying, sort of like in a traditional academic setting, where constant tests that you have to take, and there's all kinds of work that has so many different deadlines, that you're trying to manage and whatnot, and to give an example, now, I got my associate's degree, my transferable associate's degree, under a traditional academic setting, through a community
Yeah.
college there in Washington State. And I did really well, came out with a high GPA, but, I couldn't quite hold a conversation on anything I was studying, it just wasn't really, sticking with me in any meaningful way. But, after I had, after I'd been pursuing, this independent study at the Evergreen State College, in Olympia, I was finding myself actually able to hold very in-depth, deep, meaningful academic discussions on the subject matters that I was actually studying, so, and,
Yeah.
I mean, so, I felt like I was actually learning something, not just passing tests or completing assignments to a high enough level standard to get a good grade.
Yeah. I love that. I love that the instructor was able to accommodate your needs, and also, like, it our education system, that's we could have a whole separate live about that, but what it reminds me of when you're talking is, and I'll put this in the article for those of you who are listening, but the meme with the fish, and it's about, teaching a fish to climb a tree, and it's a good representation of the way our education system is structured, and how we teach to test, but
Mm.
not everybody learns or processes information in the same way, to your point earlier, Alan. So I think I love that you were able to do that. I have a sidebar question here, but is archaeology, was that a special interest of yours? Like, how did you um, select that as your major?
Yeah, it's always been an interest of mine.
Yeah.
Even before I started my college education, I mean, I would read anything I could about human prehistory, archaeology, about different indigenous cultures around the world. And I started flint knapping, when I was in high school, making stones.
You said flint knapping, it's called?
Yep, yep, yep.
For those listening, what is flint knapping? I know what it is because we've had this dialogue before, but yeah, super interesting topic.
Yeah, yeah, it's basically it refers to the manufacture of different kinds of stone implements, so the like indigenous arrowheads that you might see in a museum, uh, maybe something you might randomly find on along a riverbank or something, I mean, so making tools like that out of stone, projectile points, uh dagger blades, cutting implements, also, making ground stone tools, tools that are ground out of different materials, like ground stone woodworking tools like axes and adzes and
Yeah.
things of that sort. Um,
Yeah. Did you make your archery setup?
uh, I do have some archery gear that I've made.
Mm. Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that I shoot, anymore is, is mostly, manufactured gear, the basically fiberglass laminated recurve and longbows and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Is that like your zen when you go to do archery? Like, is that your
Exactly.
space?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, there's a very, very definite meditative aspect to it, especially if you, shoot archery traditionally, I mean, using some type of longbow or recurve or something, and also what's known as instinctive archery, where you're not using a set of pin sights or whatever, I mean, to mark your aim on the target, I mean, you're basically, uh, um, kind of, I mean, like I say, shooting instinctively, you're visualizing the flight of the arrow path and where it's likely to land. I mean, depending upon, how you aim with your arm and, align your body with the target and everything, and I mean, there's a lot of different factors that are factored in, like I said, your bodily alignment, your position in relation to the target, and the timing of your release and whatnot. So it's a lot of that stuff that you're making like instinctive calculations on, and yeah, like I said, I mean, it's a very, very meditative sort of practice for me. In fact, um, I mean, like there's like the traditional Japanese monks. I mean, have a form of martial arts called Kyodo, which basically, I mean, um, it's basically shooting archery as a form of, not only physical discipline, but, mental meditation. And so it's basically what it is for me.
Yeah, that's really cool that you found that and that works for you. And I know it's a real passion of yours. So I'm glad we were able to dig into that a little bit because I think it's important. People have to find what works for them. I know for me now, I just got into Pilates and I'm really enjoying that as a mind body connection. As a former, Division 1 soccer player, I struggled for so many years to fill that gap and have that mindfulness. So that's kind of my zen. I also built a little zen den in my house. I have like these candles and cushions and, um, just feel good stuff, soft blankets. I think for sensory needs, and grounding, some of the stuff we're talking about is really important.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So, if every listener took away, or took one action after this conversation to make the world more dyspraxia friendly, what would be your response to that? How can we be more inclusive so
I
you
would say,
feel that sense of belonging?
yeah, yeah. I would say one big thing would be, I mean, dyspraxia, I mean, it's estimated that about 5 to 6% of the population have it. So, I mean, it has a similar prevalence as ADHD. And so I would say that, one big thing, would be, so like, I mean, the probability of encountering someone with dyspraxia, is pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I would say that the biggest thing is, educate yourself, I mean, to whatever extent you can. And also, I mean, just, listen, like with any other sort of neurodivergence, I mean, listen to us, whenever we, um, talk about and write about, I mean, what it's like to be neurodivergent in whatever way. And, just, listen wholeheartedly and, try to understand us.
Yeah, that's so well said. That's why I was so excited to have this conversation with you live today because I think it's so important that we often have this top-down approach, right?
Yeah.
Where people are educating about mental health and, you have to be a doctor or a therapist, and it's like a lot of times hearing real stories from people who experience the neurodivergence, like you, like me, that resonates with people and it brings more awareness and understanding. So none of this is, again, medical advice,
Mm,
but it is, Alan sharing his lived experience and me some of mine as well with ADHD, and the slow processing and things like that. And I think the more that we have these conversations, um, with people, the more awareness spreads, the more people feel seen. I mean, when I joined Substack earlier this year, I say this with my whole heart, I've never felt more at home or like I've had a place where I could truly be myself. I see you shaking your head. You feel similarly?
mhm.
Yeah, yeah. The community here is just very welcoming and kind. And I knew nothing about I really very little about dyspraxia before I met Alan, so he's really educated me on what it is and how he moves through the world. So I'm really grateful to have you here today. And it's been a really insightful conversation. I hope that everybody walks away with a little bit of a deeper understanding of dyspraxia. Is there anything else, Alan, that you would add, before we wrap up here around, your experiences? What do you want people to know? How do we find your book? That is a great topic.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I should have copied the link so that I could have posted in the chat or something, but it is available, pretty much through any online retailer, Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. It's also available through Drafted Digital. In fact, that's who I self-published it through. And again, the title of it is Disrupted Pathways, a Dyspraxic Odyssey. And so, yeah, probably if you, just put in a few words of the title or my name, Allan White, or maybe even just, a few keywords like dyspraxia and, my name, Allan White, I'm sure it would come up.
Yeah.
And so, basically, yeah, it's pretty much available through any online book retailer.
Yeah, that's great. And I did start reading it. I'm working my way through. Well, there are two.
Mm,
So I started reading the second one, I believe, that you published, right?
Oh, that's the first one. That's
Or
my
the
number.
first one? Okay. Yeah, so your first one, and then you just recently published number 2.
Oh, the second one I haven't published yet.
Oh, you
I
didn't publish it yet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Um, I'm I came close to having it published, I mean, but I decided that I wanted to, I mean, put it through a few more editorial stages. But
Nice.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But the second one, I mean, it uh, deals more with what I envision a neuro-inclusive society is actually looking like, I mean, so it's a little bit more research oriented, and I discussed things like, um, designing public infrastructures, like transportation infrastructures, I mean, to actually emphasize active transportation methods, I mean, like cycling and walking, versus the use of privately owned vehicles or, use of public transportation and things like that, I mean, yes, they do benefit, people who aren't able to drive a car due to various reasons, I mean, be it due to some impairment or disability or some other reason, but, I mean, but also, I mean, I mean, it works to the benefit of our environment, less carbon emissions in the air. I mean, and also public health improves whenever, what they've shown through research, in parts of the world, like Copenhagen, Denmark, or Amsterdam, the Netherlands, where, active transportation is sort of the more predominant mode of transportation in many of those cities is that public health improves. Uh, Infrastructure designed around the use of active transportation is much more cost effective to me than than anything designed, for the use of privately owned vehicles because, well, first and foremost, most obviously, you people using bicycles and walking, doesn't incur as much wear and tear on roads and sidewalks in heavy motorized vehicles. And also, I mean, there's not as much need for expensive traffic signals and whatnot. I mean, whenever you have essentially, public spaces like that designed for people rather than cars. And so, I mean, I go into a lot of things, like that, as well as, I mean, um, as well as, I mean, like the way work is, structured and designed, whatnot, within, late stage capitalism and, how do we move more towards, um, I mean, having workplaces, I mean, having essentially a system of production, I mean, that can utilize a much wider spectrum of talent, within the human population. And so that's basically, I mean, what my second project, you know,
Yeah.
entails.
Y You are a wealth of knowledge in the space. That's gonna be a great read. And then your first book is more about your personal story you shared, right? And how you were late in life diagnosed, correct? And
Yeah.
you're writing all about that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and like my first book, also try to emphasize, I mean, just maybe some of the legacy effects of late diagnosis, I mean, what that can do in terms of, a person's psychosocial development and, and the various ways that, a person who is late diagnosed, I mean, has to essentially, I mean, patch up to a lot of what they missed out on, I mean, because so much of their life they were, functioning at a level, I mean, that just wasn't optimal for them. And, they missed out a lot, especially in childhood, you're going to miss out a lot on a lot of the normal sort of, socialization and acculturation, processes that, most people go through.
Yeah. Yeah, late in life diagnosis is tough across the board from a neurodiversity perspective. Like, so thank you so much for sharing that and being vulnerable. Um, I know for me, I was diagnosed ADHD when I was 30, so about 5 years ago, and it's you almost feel like you're unraveling a
Oh
little
yeah.
bit, but then also everything starts to make sense.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
is that your experience too?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Especially, I mean, when I was in my 30s and found out that I actually have dyspraxia because about 10 years prior to finding out that I was dyspraxic, I mean, I was diagnosed as having ADHD. And in some ways, at first, that seemed kind of fitting, but there was just seemed to be a lot that was unaccounted for by that diagnosis. Um, and, um, and I look back on it and it still kind of puzzles me that whenever I got the diagnosis of ADHD when I was 22 years of age, that they didn't bother to really do any tests of motor functioning, and I had told them that I had motor skill impairments all my life. I told them about having to go through OT when I was in grade school, and that's occupational therapy.
Yeah.
I told them about, experiences, like always having difficulty with stairs, never being able to keep up with my classmates and whatnot, and playing sports as a kid, all those kinds of things. And they didn't bother to do any tests of motor function, save for what's known as the bilateral grip strength test. That's where they, give you a little, I don't know what the actual instrument is called, but it's like, it's got a little grip thing on it. You squeeze on in it and it measures how many pounds of force you're generating, through the strength of your grip. And they gave me that one. I came out okay on that. So, I guess they determined I didn't have any motor impairments just based on that one little test.
On
And so,
that one test that they did?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, and it just, I guess it just goes to show, some kind of fundamental flaws in how we test for some of these different neurodivergences and what have you.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I found out about dyspraxia when I was in the United Kingdom getting my master's degree at the University of Exeter. That's where I got my master's degree at. And how I found out, because in the UK, it's much more widely known than it is here in the States. Here in the States, I mean, it's developmental coordination disorder, but they tend to think of it as just, something that occurs as a comorbidity with other things. Like it's very common for DCD to be comorbid with ADHD. It's also very common for DCD, I mean, to be comorbid with the autism spectrum disorder as well as dyslexia. And when I was in the UK and I was going on for the intake, of their disability resource center at the University of Exeter campus, I don't know how the topic came up, but we were talking about my history of impairments in motor coordination, and the counselor there asked me if I'd heard of dyspraxia. And at that time, it was something that it seemed like kind of encountered it in some literature before, but didn't really know what it was. She explained it to me. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And then later that evening, I go into the computer lab and do some research on it and found that it actually seemed to fit me much more closely than, the diagnosis I had at the time, which was ADHD. And then when I returned to the States, that's when I got the diagnosis, my most recent diagnosis of DCD, slow cognitive processing speed, which effectively is the same thing that they refer to as dyspraxia.
Yeah. Yeah, that's thank you for sharing that story. I think a couple things, it resonated with me, some of the frustration around the late in life diagnosis, and sometimes it can feel like so many people drop the ball.
Well,
Like, how did this get missed? I get that. I feel that very deeply. Um, and I think, it's great that you were able to get the resources that you need. And that's again why this conversation is so important. I remember when I was diagnosed with ADHD, I literally was sitting there scrolling, it was during COVID, and I was seeing TikToks come up. I kid you not, and I was like, "Wait a second. I check all of these boxes." The algorithm is feeding me these videos, and, I remember I went to, the first time I saw a psychiatrist,
Mhm.
and he was like, "Oh, yeah, like, ADHD." Like, he was
Mhm.
basically like, "I don't even need to finish the exam because, it's all there." And so I think, like, to your point, it's that aha moment, the light bulb goes off, and it's freeing, it's also frustrating, it's so many different emotions.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
Um, this has been awesome, Alan. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your lived experience. Again, for everybody who's new and joining, if you join late, don't worry because we're going to be sharing out the full recording on the Divergent Talent Alchemist. I'm sure Alan will want to share on his page as well. So if you're not following or subscribed to either of us, definitely consider doing that. We both write a ton in the neurodiversity space. So we would love to have you subscribe to our pages. And Alan, I just want to say thank you again. This has been a really, really rich conversation. I continue to learn from you every time we chat. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who joined today. We really appreciate you making the time.
Thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Have a good rest of your week, everyone. Bye,
Sorry.
Alan.
Bye.